Hello and welcome back to Stop and Go F1 and to this, the Stop and Go F1 Book Club. We're back once again to talk about a book, this time, this one, Inside Mercedes F1 Life in the Fast Lane, written by Matt Wyman. So I'll do a quick review and then I'll go into spoilers later on, but the initial review will be a spoiler-free one. So here's my initial thoughts, without going into spoilers, is unless you are a Mercedes fan, don't read this book. I personally can't recommend it. I didn't enjoy it. Now, I'm not a Mercedes fan. I don't hate them by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm not a Mercedes fan. I'm not a Mercedes guy. And for me, there's some parts of this book which just aren't interesting. If you are a die-hard Mercedes fan, I imagine you will enjoy this book more than I will. If you maybe know someone who is a die-hard Mercedes fan, you know Christmas is coming up, they will probably enjoy this book. But overall, for me, I can't recommend this book because I just don't think it's very good. We'll get more into it. So yes, from here on out, spoilers for this book. Yeah, that's your final warning here. We're going to start straight away, though, with, there is positives and negatives to the book, of course, and I will discuss all of them, but we're going to start with the quotes on the front of the book. And now you always have these kind of things of people saying how great the book is. Now, we have an interesting selection of people here to have quotes. The first one is Will Buxton. He's on the top there. Understandable, F1 journalist. He's on F1 TV, on Drive Survive. In many ways, he's like the international face of F1 from a journalistic point of view. So that makes sense. The second one is Greg James, the Radio 1 DJ. I mean, he also has an F1 podcast, so makes sense. Then the third one is Gareth Southgate, the former England football manager. And I thought, wow, that's a very interesting one to have there that makes very little sense. I mean, there's a sport connection, but outside of that, I don't really understand it. Then I looked more into Matt Wyman, and he's written books with Gareth Southgate before, so there's the connection there. But he's also written books with some other interesting people, including Billy Connolly, who's my favourite comedian of all time, David Attenborough. He's written books with David Attenborough before. But the most interesting of all of them is Matt Wyman wrote the autobiography of Pudsey the dog, the dancing dog that won Britain's Got Talent. So, an interesting fella to be given this role here, but, for what he had, I think he did an okay job, because honestly, I think this book, for me, now obviously for different people it's going to be different, but for me, this book was doomed from the start. Because firstly, the book doesn't know what it is. The book is trying to be about 3 or 4 different things at the same time. But the main outline of it is this guy is given 18 months in the Mercedes team. It starts at the pre-season test of 2023, and it ends at the Monaco Grand Prix of 2024. Now, I'll get back around to that in a little bit about why that ending is not the best place in the world to end. But he's given 18 months worth of access to the team to write this book. It's kind of presenting, the book itself is presenting itself as kind of this season review. Like, every chapter is, right, here's the date, here's what track we're at, I'm going to give you a brief overview of what the track is like and all this kind of stuff. So it's kind of going, we're tracking Mercedes through this 18-month period. But that's not what the book is about, because the book is about exploring the different roles within Mercedes Formula 1 team. So realistically, where some of the chapters goes, okay, well, we're here in, like, Miami or whatever, and, George Russell came 4th in FP2, and it's a hot day, and there's palm trees everywhere. Now we're going to talk to the guy who drives the truck. It's like, okay, well, I didn't need to know that you're in Miami. Well, I don't think Miami was the one when he talked to the guy who drove the truck, but that's just an example. I don't need to know that you're in Miami to know the story of the guy who drives the truck. So I think the book would be better if it was just presented as, here is a book where I talk to every single role within the Mercedes F1 team, rather than, oh, here's preseason testing, here's this, here's that, here's whatever. Now, because the book basically is every chapter is a different role within the Formula One teams, it leads to another thing where some chapters are incredibly interesting and some aren't as interesting, and that will be different to each individual person who reads it, because, some people will be more interested in other roles than others. That's just a natural thing. But it does lend itself to, when I read it personally, the first few chapters I thought, wow, this is fantastic stuff. And then the last few chapters, I'm like, Jesus Christ, end this book. I do not care. But that's just, that's just how it's going to be. And for you, if you read it, you might have it the other complete opposite way around, because people are interested in different things. I guess because it's a Formula One thing doesn't mean you're going to be interested in, a point of view of a chief mechanic compared to a point of view of the guy who is the host for the VIPs when they come to the track. Very different sectors within the same team. And as well, I think the book also presents itself, saying inside Mercedes F1. It presents itself as this thing of come and learn all the secrets. Come and see behind the scenes. You're going to learn a load of stuff you didn't already know. And in a way, you do learn a load of stuff you don't already know, because obviously these job roles that we discuss aren't the most well-known things in the world. But, it was presented, I felt anyway, as this book that was going to kind of show secrets of what happened to Mercedes throughout the year, and say right, well, when this happened, behind the scenes this was happening, and all this kind of stuff. And that brings me to my point here, where it's just they give you incredible detail on some things, and then other things that you really want to know about, nothing. So, for example, there's a chapter about Mick Schumacher and his work as the simulator driver, and they go into so much detail about a Lewis Hamilton debrief from FP2 at Silverstone and how that affects Mick Schumacher running the simulator overnight. And they give you the quotes of Lewis in this behind-the-scenes meeting, and they tell you kind of how they analysed it. It's wow, that's a lot of detail they've given there. But then, a few chapters later, we're at Singapore 2023, and both Lewis and George are going for the win of that race, and it's that infamous moment where George crashes going for the win in the closing spaces of the race, last few laps. And he's in the garage. The writer of this book is in the garage in Singapore when George Russell crashes, costing Mercedes what could have been what would have been their only victory of the year. And we learn nothing. There's nothing of the real reaction. There's nothing of what happened to George Russell when he came back. There's nothing of George's reaction when he came back. Everything he writes about is just stuff that kind of happened on interviews on TV. But, later on we'll hear about, George Russell was in Las Vegas, and behind the scenes he said, I could do with a nap. It's I don't want to know what George Russell is saying then. I want to know what he's saying when he comes back to the garage. I want to know what he says to the engineers and the mechanics when he gets back to the garage from Singapore. So it's weighing up the moments of telling you the detail. And when it's those really interesting, juicy bits that you really want to know, they go, nah, I'm not going to tell you anything about that. And then from that, the most interesting thing to happen to Mercedes over the past 18 months is Lewis Hamilton leaving and going to Ferrari. And the book covers that just. So, as I said, the book spans this 18-month section, and within that, there is Lewis leaving. And we're kind of building to that. I felt like that anyway, because I knew that it was going to happen. I'm waiting for that chapter. And then we get to that chapter. And it's also the chapter where he has a sit-down interview with Toto Wolff. And you're like, oh my god, the stars have aligned here. Lewis Hamilton has left the team for Ferrari a week before. It coincides with the time that he is with Toto Wolff for this interview. And we get a few interesting quotes here that I've written down. So, Toto Wolff says, it helps us because it avoids the moment where we have to tell the sport's most iconic driver that we want him to stop. There is a reason why we signed a 1+1 year contract. we are in a sport where cognitive sharpness is extremely important. So Toto Wolff's kind of suggesting that he maybe thinks that Lewis is on the decline a little bit. It's like, wow, that's super interesting. Then he goes on to say, like, oh, Lewis didn't give me any time to react, which I disagree with because you had the entire year. And he goes on to say, we missed out on signing people like Leclerc or Norris. And we're like, I'm reading this going, this is fantastic stuff. This is really, really interesting stuff. And then it ends. We have the biggest story in F1 in the past few years of Lewis Hamilton leaving Mercedes to go to Ferrari. We get those really juicy quotes there, and there's no pressing on it at all. There's no asking questions after these questions. We have those quotes, and the next thing is like, oh, Toto Wolff had a difficult childhood in Austria. It's like, oh, maybe he did, but I don't care right now. We're dealing with this massive story, and you've given it like 2 paragraphs. Whilst, a few hours ago, I was reading about Mick Schumacher doing simulator laps for about 40 pages. Why can't we talk about this a little bit more? And then we carry on reading through the Toto Wolff backstory, and I think, well, obviously, he's just put this in here, and then we'll go back to talking about Lewis Hamilton leaving Mercedes. But no, in the exact same chapter that we talk about Lewis Hamilton leaving Mercedes, we talk about Toto Wolff's sad backstory, and then we're talking about James Hazel, the man who hosts the guests at Mercedes for races. I'm like, I'm sure James Hazel's a lovely man, but right now, I don't care about him. I want to know about this huge story that we're just overlooking for some reason. It's like, every time there's a moment for like a juicy bit of detail that the fans would legitimately love to know, they go, no. And I feel, from reading the book, either one of 2 things has happened. Either Mercedes has said, we don't want you writing this, or the writer has got scared and gone, they won't want me writing this. Because it feels, when you're reading it, like he's written it, then Mercedes have written it again. Because there is never any negative to Mercedes, ever, in the book. Which, isn't shocking. It's a book all about Mercedes. But, even in a season where they take their first season of not winning since, 2011? Despite this, everything that happens in the book is talking about how great they are. And it's just like all the time they're this wonderful team and they're the best on the grid, even though they weren't the best that year. Everyone is the best and everyone's trying their best and they're all having a great time. And it's like, I'm sure everyone is having a great time and trying their best, but you're also in the toughest time in your team's history in the last 10 years. So maybe there's a bit more balance here. There's no balance in the book as to why maybe this went wrong here, this went wrong here. It's all very positive, and I feel like Mercedes have gone through it with a fine-tooth comb and gone, oh, well, let's turn that there and all this kind of stuff. Also, my God, the 2021 season gets mentioned a lot. Now, I'm not shocked that it gets mentioned, because of course it's going to get mentioned, but it gets mentioned a lot. I reckon every 3 to 4 chapters they mention 2021, and they can't just mention it. They'll go, and Lewis Hamilton won this race in 2021, which of course was the worst thing ever to happen in the history of the world, the most corrupt season ever, where everyone was very upset and the entire world decided that it was the worst thing to happen in sports history, and we're really angry about it. And then you go, oh, right, okay, well, obviously they're not happy about how 2021 ended. And then a chapter later you go, and then, yeah, in 2021, they won the Constructors' Championship, but of course they didn't win the Drivers because the most evil and corrupt board of officials, it's like, we get it. A chapter ago, we read that you think the 2021 championship didn't go the way you think it should have. And, lots of people feel that way. We get it. You don't need to remind us every time you say 2021 that the Mercedes official line is that they don't agree with the way it went down. We're fully aware. It's just like, it just seems like the guy's written the book and then Mercedes have come along and gone, this is very good, but we're going to rewrite all of this to make sure that everyone knows that we're the best team and 2021 was wrong. And it's just like, come on, it just feels unnatural to read, because it just doesn't feel like what a real person would have written, which is a real shame because I wanted to enjoy the book. And there is positive moments of the book, which I will get onto now. So for me, the best bits of the book are when he's talking to people that we would never hear from. Of course, we hear from Toto and Russell and Hamilton. We hear from them basically every race we can, and we hear from maybe some other people as well. But like, there's other people in the book who tell stories like you've never heard before, and they're really good. Like, there's a few I've written down here. Matt Dean tells a story about how Michael Schumacher came into the team and how he made the team feel important around him. Evan Short, the Mercedes trackside electronics leader, he tells a fantastic story about how he came into Formula One with the Ferrari team as a radio spy, and he decrypted McLaren's team radio. Amazing story that I've never heard before. For me, the highlight of the book. Like, so good. It's just stuff like that which was the best. And there's like little glimpses of a good book in it. Like, he talks about the Miami 2023 race and how he was with the mechanics. And after the race, they basically went from the pits to the airport. But before they did that, Mercedes hired them 4 hotel rooms for about 20 mechanics to go into for 15 minutes to like have a shower and get changed before catching the flight, and how he is with the mechanics at this time and has to shower and get changed with them in these cramped spaces. It's like, that's a story we would never hear otherwise. It's like, that's the insight we want. We want these stories that we would never ever know apart from if they were in this book. And that's one, and that's about it. And then the final thing is like, the book really doesn't have an ending because they've set it up in such a strange way, because they gave him 18 months. Which isn't even a season and a half, it's like a season and a quarter. And that's not how you tell a story in sports. Like, if it had just been one season, you could tell the story of the season, then end at the end and go, hey, you know what? It wasn't a great year for Mercedes. The first year they haven't won a race since 2011, but still, they finished second in the Constructors' Championship, and you can build on that and go, hey, look, they're not at the top, but they're going to get there soon. You reach this nice conclusion. If it had been like a story of 2 seasons, and it included this season, you could include the likes of, you know, the wins that they've had this year, which have been like a surprise. Or even if they finished at the summer break this year, you could finish with the Russell disqualification into the Hamilton win. And that's an ending there. But because it goes from the start of last season to Monaco this season, that's not an ending. Monaco this year was what, like the 6th race? There's no like real happy ending to this book. And because of that, there's an epilogue afterwards where, despite him no longer being with the team and being a fan watching from home, he writes all about Lewis Hamilton winning the Silverstone Grand Prix and talking about how much it meant to the team based off of interviews and clips from the team radio. And it's like, yes, that is a great ending, because that's a fantastic moment in the sports history of Lewis winning that race for the 9th time, his last time there as a Mercedes driver. That is a fantastic ending. The issue is, the guy writing the bloody book, whose whole point is to be inside the team when things happen, wasn't there because his time had ended with the team. Like, there is no natural ending. And I think that's what the book was screwed from the start, because there's no natural ending in that time period that they gave him. So I don't know how he was supposed to do this better than he did, along with the fact that it's not really a season retrospective, because like I said, it's just a book about jobs. So for me, I just found the book really, really frustrating, which was a shame because I really wanted to enjoy it. I think, honestly now, this is the first ever Formula One book that I have read and not enjoyed. Even with Gunther Steiner's book that I reviewed a couple months ago, even though there was a lot of repeated stories from his first book, I still enjoyed it because of the new stuff that was in there. With this, yes, there are stories that I enjoy, but just going through it is a slog, and it's just like, you know it's not going to end well, because obviously Mercedes don't get back to the top, and you also know he's going to leave the team at a weird point. So yeah, for me, I can't recommend this book, because I didn't enjoy it, even though I wanted to. If you are a Mercedes diehard fan, maybe you will enjoy it more than I did, but for me, unfortunately, this ain't it. Hopefully, the next book I review, whenever that will be more to my taste, but there you go. Very sorry, Matt Wyman. He did a fantastic job, to be fair, with what he had, and he did some very good interviews. It just didn't all come together. for me. So there you go. Right, that's it. I will see you next time. Until then, have a good one. Goodbye.